There we go. Okay, we're gonna get this thing figured out. And by we, I mean me. And by figure it out, I mean learn how to stream effectively. So here we go. We even have a mic this time. Last stream, I accidentally hit a button that said it was just for kids, which means there's no chat, which means there's no discussion, which is kind of the point of doing a stream like this, is to be able to respond out loud and chat with you guys, share ideas. And for that to be an effective sharing, it has to go both ways. I really think that there is so much value in learning how to think on your feet. And to do that in a group setting where you interact with someone else and you bounce ideas back and forth is incredibly valuable. The best classes I have ever had are, for the most part, the ones that were discussion format, where you would come to class prepared on a topic, seminar style, to discuss and to think. And typically you were just chomping at the bit, ready to share your ideas. But as you went around the room, I found that sharing those ideas, they grew, and everyone else's insights helped to shape my own. And one of the things that's really cool about streaming as a format is that through the comment section, through the chat, we have an opportunity to interact back and forth where you share your ideas and they inform mine and we work back and forth. This conversation is incredibly valuable. And I think it's actually good for the world if we've, in an incredibly broad sense, just if people talk a lot, if we share ideas. So if you have comments and questions, please leave them below. A moment ago, when I ran the previous unsuccessful stream, we were talking a little bit about identity and different ways of answering the question, who am I? Unfortunately, that is a emotionally complicated question because humans are complicated. Jordan Peterson at one point said that you are a chimpanzee full of snakes, which ended up in a cartoon from Freedom Tunes, which is quite funny, one of his better pieces of work. Um, and you know, the idea that there's a lot of different subparts within you is an idea that's quite old. Sigmund Freud identified at least three parts of self. You have an id, an ego, and a superego. And then Carl Jung identified many, many more, an undisclosed number of archetypes vying for control within yourself. And then there's an anima or an animus, and just all these pieces. And when you're trying to figure out who you are, it's an undefined question. Are you trying to figure out which of those voices is the real you? Um, if so, why are you choosing that one and not another? And is it something that is chosen or something that you create? That's another question. One of the things that, one of the answers that's helped me, and we'll talk about a couple of them, is the idea that you're all of yourself. This is an idea that I got from my brother-in-law when we were still teenagers. He was a friend of mine, and I asked him, how do you know who you really are? And he said, aren't you all of yourself? Aren't you the whole thing? So all of those pieces, good, bad, and ugly. I like that idea a lot. It's very holistic in a very complete way. And in some ways it says, hey, this question doesn't matter quite as much as you're making it out to. You could relax and just be without needing a conscious mental picture of who you are. And that's good. There's something kind of Taoist about that. The name that can be named is not the true name. The identity that can be identified is not the true identity. I like that. Let's talk about a couple of others that have also been helpful. One of the things that I like to think about is the difference between the things that you have versus the things that you are. The thing that got me wondering about that is Alzheimer's. If you have mental decline in your later years, is that a decline in what you are or a decline in what you have? I have, 10 fingers and 10 toes. I'm never more than a misplaced hatchet blow, or, if I spend enough time in a machine shop, I'm sure that the chances of losing a finger get pretty high if the number of fingers that you see in a machine shop or the number of fingers you see at a working farm or any indicator, those are something that you can lose while still being who you are. That's something that you have, not something that you are. I have this finger. I am not this finger. It could be separated from me without the identity being, corrupted or removed. There are elements of your brain that are the same way. I think about traumatic brain injuries like the brain injury that Phineas Gage had. Phineas Gage was a man in the 1800s who worked on the railroads, and he had a very famous accident where he was tamping some dynamite into a hole in the rock with a tamping iron, which is about a 3-foot spike made of steel. And as he was tapping this into place, the part of the charge went off, and it sent the tamping iron up through here and out through here. And by all rights, it should have killed him, but he got up with a different personality. A large part of the front part of his brain had been blasted away, and he was blind in one eye for the rest of his life. And he used that tamping iron as a walking stick for the rest of his life, kept it around as, I guess, a good luck charm because he'd survived. But his personality was altered. He used to be really good at math, couldn't do math afterwards. He used to have very good impulse control. Afterwards, he had very bad impulse control. And this was, in some ways, the foundation of modern neuroscience when we started investigating different parts of the brain and what they do for you. So the question is that something that he had or something that he was? I like to think, I posted this just the other day on Twitter, that I am not what I am fundamentally and what you are fundamentally is not your hardware, and it's not the software of the ideas that you're running. You're the user, taking the computer analogy. We have brains, we use brains, we have ideas, we have backgrounds, we have history that essentially act like programming in a computer. But that's not what we are fundamentally. What we are fundamentally is the user of those things. Choice is a really fiddly thing because a lot of choice is about desire. People will say, well, if you want it enough, you'll make it happen. But a lot of our desires are preloaded, either by some mixture of some of it's preloaded probably in the hardware, some of it's preloaded in the software. I don't know how all that works out. But I do know that there is a moment of choice, especially when there's paired desires. Like if I want two things at once, something is selecting between them. And that something, if you push it back far enough, is an agent. And even if that choice is incredibly subtle, I am choosing to lean more toward this idea or lean more toward this one. I am choosing to hold space open and wait to react from a stimulus. I think it's often that kind of gentle direction, but that fundamentally is who you are, or who I am. It looks like we have 5 of us here in the stream. If you have questions or want to chat about any of these ideas, throw in an idea. I'd love to let this wander a little bit based off of your interests. And we'll probably go until about 12:30 and then cut off there, depending on how things are going. So those were 2 ideas. One is that you're all of yourself, and the other is that there's a difference between those things that you have and those things that you are. It's interesting to think about even losing memory. What memories are things that you have? And maybe some of them get deep enough that they're part of what you are. These are 2 very different ideas. One of them says that you are all of yourself. That would include all of your hardware, all of your software, and the user, all 3. That all 3 of those are part of who and what you are. And the other is a very restricted idea that says you are the thing that chooses at the core of all of it. And if you were to lose a finger or an arm or a portion of your brain or a set of memories due to Alzheimer's, what you are at its core stays. I think there's value in both of these ideas. I love paradox as a way to pursue truth. A lot of things that are deeply true have opposites that are also true, like this idea that you are all of yourself and also an extremely restricted part of yourself, this very narrow thing. And I'm sure that there's a greater truth that resolves these. When you find a paradox is something that appears to be a contradiction. It appears to be impossible. It appears that 2 things should not be true at once. This is like the Buddhist idea of a koan. A koan is a story that's designed to be paradoxical. And the paradox is there to get you to stop. One of the reasons it's there is to get you to stop and think and wonder about it and say, okay, there's the flags have been raised. There's an indicator here, giant glowing neon sign that says there's something about the world that I don't understand that is highlighted by this story or this idea. A lot of the teachings of Jesus Christ work that way, where they're paradoxical, or they thread a really difficult needle, like render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. We have a comment from, I can't quite pronounce your name there. It's in cursive. I don't know how you did that on chat. That's amazing. It would be so funny to think that things would be that easy, but they never are. But if we look at the end, of course, they are easy solutions because they already happened. That's interesting. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. I'll give it a second read. It would be so funny to think that things would be that easy. Well, both of those solutions are easy. Another thing that's kind of funny to me is this is a principle that I kind of hold as a heuristic, you have ideas that are not strictly speaking always true, but are so useful that they're worth treating as though they're true most of the time. It's like a really strong rule of thumb. That's a heuristic. One of these heuristics that I use is that good questions don't have obvious answers. If a question is a real question, a question that is worth asking, that is worth your time and attention, it shouldn't have an obvious answer. And if you find an obvious answer, that's a really strong indication that it's the wrong answer. A lot of political ideologies are simple, easy answers to difficult questions. Classic example of this one is ideas like class struggle. It's a very simple idea that allows you to make a lot of sense out of the world. And it does. It allows you to make a lot of sense out of the world. But it's not complete because it's too fast. It's too easy. It ignores too much about human nature, about the way we interact, about individual desire, about the source of value. And because it's simple, if you hold to that idea only, you ignore information, and you ignore information that is valuable and good and would help you to stretch out your worldview. So on the one side, you've got this, on the identity question, you're all of yourself. On the other one, you're a super restricted part of yourself. There's one that I don't go toward, which is this idea that you are none of yourself, the idea of ego death. You don't actually exist. You're just part of this greater thing. Time is an illusion, and so is death. It's an interesting thing to think about. With paradox, there is a lot of value in identifying these places where there should be a contradiction, where it doesn't quite make sense. Thank you for your comment. I appreciate it. If you want to throw in a follow-up, I'd love to see that as well. Currently reading the chat on my phone, fastest way I know how to do it. Let's see here. One thing that I have wondered a lot about is one of these ideas related to identity is an idea from Aristotle. Aristotle said that virtue is all about a thing doing that which it was meant to do well. So a knife has a virtue if a knife is able to cut well. A knife is for cutting, that's its purpose. So if it fulfills that purpose well, in an effective manner, without a lot of hiccups, it's a good knife. It's knifing well. And with the identity thing, I think one of the reasons why it is emotional, and I'm guessing here because this is a question that I don't understand the roots of this, like why it's such a emotionally involved question, because it is. I mean, we care. Who are we? Do we fit in with the group? Do we not? What are we for? This idea from Aristotle is that if you can find out what, in kind of a broad sense, a human should human well. What should a human do? It's a very broad thing for Aristotle. It's this idea of virtue in a broad sense. Arete, you should be able to do a lot of things. You should be able to think and read and learn and fight and sleep and know when to do all of these things. But on a more individual level, I think one of the reasons we care about identity so much is so that we can figure out what we are for, so we can figure out where our talents and our abilities fit the world, fit the task needed for the world, so that we can perform it well and have that kind of virtue. Like the knife that cuts well, you can be the Joseph that Joseph's well. Follow up. Sorry, Finland's names mean nothing for English speakers. I would love to learn some Finnish. That is an amazing language. As I understand it, it's closer to Hungarian than any other language, if I'm not mistaken. I find that really interesting that it's not closely related to, the geographical neighbors. And am I wrong in thinking that Tolkien based some of Elvish off of Finnish? Because if so, then that's a very pretty language. A friend of mine speaks Finnish. It's something that I should ask her for a few words. It's really cool. Alrighty. Any other comments? Feel free to jump in. I'd be curious what your favorite videos have been on this channel. We cover a very large range of topics. A lot of the videos have been more project-based, and I think that's where a lot of our viewers have really come from. Our projects like the iron smelts that we did with Cody from Cody's Lab, or the crossovers we did with the King of Random, or with Andy from How to Make Everything. But a lot of what we do also are discussions, ideas, trying to break down an idea that's implicit in a thing, or sitting in front of a wall of books and chatting about something. I'd be curious to find if you'd be willing to write down what your favorite videos have been and why. That would be very valuable information for me at the very least. And it would also probably make for a good discussion. Related to the idea from Aristotle about your virtue, about virtue being figuring out what you're meant for and doing that thing well, I find that interesting to think about in terms of specialization, and also in terms of, because specialization is, you want to feel really good at something. You want to feel like you're the best. You want to feel differentiated. In a group of friends, you have that one friend who's the funny one. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the most common sources of a bar fight is a new friend in a friend group trying to take the role of being the funny guy. And the previous funny guy, or the guy who identifies as the funny one in the group, taking issue with that. And of course, as soon as you add alcohol into the mix, conflicts can spiral out of control a little bit. But that idea that you want to be a specialist. You don't just want to be a funny guy. You want to be the funny guy, the guy who is providing the funny role for your friend group, to the point that that is a coveted piece of real estate that you'd be willing to fight over. I find that really, really interesting. With my own kids, I noticed that they try to set up their identity in terms of comparison with their siblings a lot. So my daughter will say, well, I'm the one who's good at this. And I'll say, well, technically, you're all pretty darn good at that. She'll try to say, well, I'm the best. That comparative aspect, I think a charitable way to read that is that we want to feel like we are providing a unique service, something that is superlative in some way. We want to be able to do something that is so useful that people will come to us for that thing. And there's virtue in that. It's virtue that I think is at risk with the move we're taking now toward AI, where a lot of value that we place on ourselves because of our work is about to become much, much harder to justify. If I base my identity on being an attorney, and then an AI attorney comes along that's able to do my job as well or better than me, that will be a difficult identity spot to keep. And same if you're a radiologist or any of the other disciplines that are about to get a major overhaul with AI looming on the horizon. The other part of virtue, this Greek idea, the word he used, the ancient Greek word for this is arete, kind of a broad sense of virtue, it's not specialist at all. It's generalist. It's all about people in general. You want to be able to human well. You want to reason well and feel well and be able to perceive kind of on an emotional, intuitive level well. You want to be able to act well, fight when you need to fight, make peace when you need to make peace, work in the garden one day, fix a computer the next, negotiate a peace treaty the next, or peace treaty twice. Be able to hold an interesting conversation. I like that. Again, I think there's virtue in both of these ideas. We want to be specialists. We want to feel like our unique talents and our unique interests are right in the right place at the right time where we're able to do something. Another idea from Aristotle is that where the needs of the world and your own personal talents intersect, that's where you'll find your calling and a lot of this purpose. A follow-up comment. Before Finnish and Sami, many lost languages were spoken in Finland. An early Indo-European language was spoken in Finland before Latin was spoken in Italy or Sanskrit in India. It's interesting. I was just barely looking up the origins of Proto-Indo-European. Apparently, there's a lot of scholarly debate on exactly where the heartland of Proto-Indo-European was. When I was in my undergrad, I took a course on the history of the English language, and it was a fascinating class. We had to memorize a little bit of Old English in it, which, let's see if I still have any of it. Nu shulan herian hiomon riches weard, meotoris meach de antis modithank. Weor kulder fader swahi wundre was, ekedrichtin oranstelde. He araskeop, joven to grova, halig skippend. No idea if I'm pronouncing that right, it's been a few years. But that's from a poem called Cadman's Hymn. A beautiful language. We did a little bit with Middle English and traced the growth of English through its centuries. And one of the projects that we did is we had to take the etymology of an English word and trace it all the way back into Proto-Indo-European and show how the sounds and the meaning had changed over time. And I don't know how I did this. I didn't do it on purpose, but that was one of the best essays I ever did in college. I did the word weird because I knew that weird had some roots in Norse. It was an old word, so I figured I'd be able to trace it back. And it turns out I was right. And it turns out that the word weird means turns out. It used to mean fate. It was an old word for fate. And then after Shakespeare talked about the weird sisters, talking about the three witches that Macbeth interacts with in that play, the word came to mean sinister and twisted and unusual and unorthodox and kind of eerie. And that's where it shifted from meaning fate in English to meaning something unusual. But in this little essay, I ended up writing it in this way that was circular. So the beginning and the end kind of matched into each other. I got to present it at an undergraduate literature conference. It was really fun. I might post it on the website at some point. But yeah, the Proto-Indo-European roots of languages. Finnish is in the Indo-European family. It's wild to me how many languages are related that way. I mean, you think of the Romance languages and the Germanic languages being very, very distinct, but they're both from Indo-European. And then you can also take those connections and find them into the Indian subcontinent. And nowadays, a modern speaker of English and a modern speaker of some of these languages from the Indian subcontinent have a really hard time understanding each other. They do not sound anything alike, but we're all cousins in the end. It's cool stuff. Sounds so Sime Lapland. That's cool. That's really cool. I served a religious mission in my early 20s. I was a Latter-day Saint missionary, one of the Mormon missionaries in the Netherlands and Belgium. I didn't choose the location. It was selected for me as part of a calling process. We send in paperwork saying, I'd like to go on a mission, and then you get a call. You never know exactly where to. And I was sent to the Netherlands and Belgium, and it was an incredible 2-year experience, formative for me. Great opportunity to talk with a lot of people on the street and hear bits of their life stories. When you're a missionary, people just open up and share things with you. I met a lot of very interesting people. And part of the time that I was there, I spent in Friesland. Friesland I was adjacent to Friesland. I was in a city called Groningen in the north of the Netherlands, but I would go on work trips and spend a fair amount of time in Friesland. And there, Dutch is not the primary language. It's a secondary language. It's a formal language for interacting with the government and if you happen to travel outside of Friesland. But a lot of people there grow up speaking Fries. And Fries is very, very close to Old English. I had a friend there who was a Baukje, and another friend, his first name escapes me at the moment, who shared a little bit of Fries with me and taught me to say Goeiedag and a few other words. And they have a tongue twister in Fries, which I tried to learn. It's an old shibboleth that Peter de Groot used to ask people to say, and if they couldn't pronounce it right, he'd chop their head off with his massive two-handed sword. And I tried to learn to speak it, but I talked to this one Fries guy and he said, yeah, your head would be coming off. So apparently my pronunciation of butter, brie, and green cheese with dat niet sissiken is geen brug de Fries is not going to save my skin if Peter the Great is running around. Funny stuff. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. If you have a final thought that you'd like to discuss, throw it in the chat and we'll discuss it, and then we'll close off for the day. Thank you again for being here. It's fun to share a lunch break and chat with you all. This YouTube channel is still very much a passion project. It's something that I try to give time to, but it's by no means providing the primary income. I think I make about $2 a day from AdSense with 38,000 subscribers. So if that gives you any sense of the math. Fun stuff. I'll wait around for another few seconds for any other messages and then we'll close out. Let's plan on doing another one of these live streams next week, either Thursday or Friday. I'll nail down that time as we get closer, around the same time of day. All right. No further comments, so we'll close it there. Thank you for your conversation. Thank you for your comments. And one of these days, I might need to learn how to pronounce that in Finnish. That's awesome. Thank you, and